So welcome to ThePrint Uninterrupted. Today I'm speaking to Nico Lange. He is a senior fellow with the Transatlantic Defense and Security Program at the Center for European Policy Analysis, as well as a senior fellow at the Munich Security Conference. But what makes him very special and very relevant to our discussion today is that he has served as the Chief of Staff of German Armed Forces from 2019 to 2022. What a pleasure it is to be joined by you, Mr. Lange. Welcome to India.
Thank you for having me.
So much is happening, of course. Europe is right now the center of so much of flux with respect to what is happening in the US, etc. But in the midst of all this, I'd like to have your views on three specific dates. One is the 19th of March, when for the first time an unprecedented defense spending bill was passed by the German lower house, the Bundestag. And then a few days later, on the 21st of March, it was passed by the upper house as well. And before the euphoria could really materialize, because we saw that the German stocks doing well, etc., you opened up, I would say, unprecedented amounts of defense spending in the future at least. But then came the 2nd April of 2025, the Liberation Day, when Donald Trump brought out all those knee-jerk tariffs. And ever since, it's been, I would say, a bit of a roller coaster ride for the rest of the world, including for India. How do you make sense of that? Where is Europe going?
I think everything you just said, in combination with the backdrop of the ongoing Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, is leading now to a true European awakening. And I mean, it took us a long time to wake up, and we hit the snooze button a couple of times. But now Europe is really ready to take on the challenge of providing for its own defense, for reviving its defense industry and its defense technologies, and also for increasing readiness of the armed forces in Europe to an extent that we can deter Russia from further aggression, and to an extent where I think power will play more of a role for European politics than it did in the last decades. And Germany is key to that. I mean, because you mentioned the change of the German constitution that happened in March, Germany decided that if we want to, we can have unlimited defense spending. It will not be part of the debt brake anymore.
Right.
And that's, I think, a message. It's a message to friends and allies and partners. But of course, it's also a message to foes.
And what is interesting here is to understand that this did not come in a retaliation of what Donald Trump was going to announce a few days later. But this is perhaps something which can be, in my opinion, described finally as the Zeitenwende in Germany, because we've been hearing this term for the last 3 years in India and in the rest of the world. But I don't think it has meant much, because all these years, I think there was still a very high, so to say, desire to go back to where things were and how to go back to the status quo. But I think what happened after Donald Trump came and the way he sort of completely upended the American help for Ukraine perhaps was a wake-up call for Europeans. And so now we have a new chancellor from the CDU. I think you're affiliated to the CDU, and he's going to come. But he has a lot of tasks, right? I mean, on the one hand, you have to take on the burden of your responsibility. I think Donald Trump has made it very, very clear. On the other hand, it is also about the European vision for defense spending, what we keep hearing from Ursula von der Leyen in terms of 800 billion euros, etc. And then there is also about changing Germany from within. This seems to be extremely monumental.
I mean, it's not easy for anybody right now. It's a very serious matter. Maybe Friedrich Merz is the serious person for serious times. But when it comes to German foreign policy and defense policy in Europe, the task, I think, is more modest than this. Germany has been lagging behind for a long time. So now it's not to saying, oh, we were behind everybody and now we are coming and now we are leading. It's more Germany catching up to the Central Eastern Europeans, to the Northern Europeans. And I think that's where Merz's compass is. And we will see that.
So one of the enablers to that, I mean, and I want you to sort of explain this a little bit to the Indian audiences as well, is that it was your party, the CTU, that first introduced the idea of a debt brake in 2009, and which is right after the financial crisis of 2008, and which was looked upon as a preventive measure. It kind of stopped Germany from taking more debt. Now it is the CTU that has called for removing the debt brake, especially on defense. That has been pretty much a shift there. I mean, do you think this reading is correct? What role does the debt brake or the removal of the debt brake plays here?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I have an ambivalent view on this because I think there are good arguments for the debt brake.
Okay.
And I also have children, and just to push the burden over to the children who have already more difficulties in building property, in paying for education, in getting started into life, just to say, okay, now we make more debt and they can also pay the debt off. It's a matter of intergenerational justice, and I have my doubts. But on the other hand, when it comes to defense, we now have at least two challenges. Maybe there will be even more, a third one and a fourth one. But the two challenges are Russia is not stopping its war of aggression. It's a war to change the European order. It's not a war about a few square kilometers in Donbass. It's a war against us and against European security order. And we have to provide to defend Europe and to deter Russia from future aggression. And the second element is the question that everybody has in Europe, and maybe already has answered, is can we trust the United States of America? And it seems we can't. And Europe has a lot to catch up in the security sector if we cannot rely on the United States of America anymore. We have to ramp up production. We have to develop our own technologies. We have to get our forces ready. We have to change the force posture. So you can make good arguments that this is a challenge that needs to be tackled quickly and therefore needs to be handled outside of the debt brake. And it's not the debt brake that the debt brake got deleted. It's an exception from the debt brake
It's exempted,
for
yes.
defense spending. And on Liberation Day, to be honest with you, I would not mess with the European Union on trade and tariffs, because I think that's what we are really good at.
Yeah.
Our difficulties are with security, and that's where our vulnerabilities are, and we are addressing them now. And that's, I think, also what the United States is doing can be painful to us if they increase our vulnerabilities on security. But on trade, tariffs, global trade, trade rules, it's like asymmetric warfare. We have a lot of very good specialists on this in the European Commission, and it will be very tough for anybody to deal with us there.
What I'm particularly interested in is that how will your anti-coercion instrument, which has come into existence only, I think, a couple of years ago, and it has never been invoked so far, and will there be a situation where the European Union will invoke a anti-coercion instrument against the United States of America? That would be a rather unprecedented situation, Nico. But before I come to that, one of the perceptions that are commonly held in India is that why is Europe pushing for this war? This is a war. Of course, you have Russia. You cannot wish away geography. And I asked this question a couple of weeks ago. I was speaking to a Singaporean diplomat, Kishore Mehbubani, is very well known. And he was of the view that Europeans committed a mistake because they stopped talking to Russia. So there is a perception, and I think you're the best person to answer that because you come from Germany, is that why do you think that there is a perception that Europeans should have talked to Russia more? They should have tried to use the diplomatic channels more? Why are you pushing Ukraine to a war that it cannot win, at least as far as the perception goes?
Well, first of all, Ukraine has agency in this. I mean, it's like, I do not want to be personal on anybody, but I'm very skeptical if old men are talking about geopolitics, this country and the big powers and that. There are 40 million people in Ukraine who want to live free, who want to determine their own fate. And they have a neighbor who is not allowing them to decide where they want to live, how they want to live, which cooperation they want to have. And this is not, in that sense, not a matter of geopolitics where somebody is doing something with Ukraine. It's the Ukrainians deciding where they want to be, and it's their neighbor trying to occupy them to prevent them from living freely. The Ukrainians have agency, and I would even say they have a lot of agency in this. So the question is, are we supporting the Ukrainians or are we supporting the Russians? And there the answer is very clear. We are supporting the Ukrainians because the European order after the Second World War is based on the idea of self-determination and freedom, and not on the idea that great powers can decide what their neighbors do. And I think everybody in India would agree that you would not want your big neighbor China to decide how India is developing and what India is doing. So that's the same thing for the Ukrainians. The problem of diplomacy that I see very often, that is discussed by many, including your Singaporean counterpart that you talk to, as a theoretical matter. And in theory, you just have to go there and you have to talk to Putin, and then there will be peace. But in practice, so many people are talking to Putin all of the time. And I mean, I lived in Russia. I speak fluent Russian. I'm talking to Russians all of the time. I'm trying to do what I can to have a conversation with them. But when you talk to Putin, the answer you get is, yes, I'm in favor of peace. I want ceasefire and peace. There's just a small nuance. And the small nuance is the existence of Ukraine. So give Ukraine up, have NATO retreated to where NATO was in 1998, give up on the idea of self-determination and freedom in Europe, and then there will be peace. So this is not serious. And I think we should be more serious and not naive in the sense, oh, you just have to talk to Putin and there will be peace. No, you have to talk to him, and at the same time you have to be strong enough to force him to come to the table and have a meaningful conversation. You have to bring strength with the diplomacy, and then that's a realist way of achieving something with Putin. And look what happened. The United States pushed Ukraine very heavily. And Ukraine agreed with everything and said, we are ready for an unconditional ceasefire right now.
Yeah.
And the official answer we got publicly from the Kremlin was, we are not ready for ceasefire now. There you have your answer.
Yeah. No, and so why I ask you this question is that, well, I understand that in the backdrop of a full-scale invasion, I think also talking or having this communication also takes on its own complexities. But before the war had begun, would you agree with this perception that many people in India still have, is that there was a time when this war was a war of, it could have been avoided. You know, it wasn't really a war of compulsion, because all you had to do is that you had to give Russia in writing that Ukraine will not join NATO. And so be it. Do you agree with this kind of a reading of that situation? Let's just rewind a bit to January 2022 and before that.
No, I do not agree with that. And it's also not accurate when you talk about the historic facts.
Okay.
NATO membership of Ukraine became a goal of Ukrainian policy after the Russian intervention of 2014. Ukraine didn't even want to be a member of NATO, and nobody in NATO wanted Ukraine to be a member quickly. Yes, there was the Bucharest summit decision that they can be NATO member sometime, but there was no process of bringing Ukraine into NATO. Ukraine decided that we want to be member of NATO, and even has written it into the Ukrainian constitution after 2014, when Russia illegally annexed Crimea and militarily intervened in Donbass, because Ukraine saw no other option to protect itself than to have aspiration for NATO membership. Very similar to the Central Eastern European countries, the Baltic states, Poland, Romania, and others, who by themselves decided, if we want foreign direct investment to come to our country, if we want to develop our economy, if we want to become countries with high well-being of our citizens, we need security. And we need security because our neighbor Russia lives under the impression that they can push around everybody who is their neighbor and lives close to them, because they have this idea that they are somehow a superior nation that can tell others how to live and what to do. So they chose to become members of NATO. But this was never something that is an idea to have an aggression against Russia. It was always a defense basically everybody is saying, Russia, please leave us alone. We do not want anything from you. Do whatever you want, but please leave us alone. The problem is Russia is not leaving the neighbors alone.
So you do not agree as a German and also as a chief of the staff for German armed forces. I mean, that's a very responsible post to have. I mean, do you not see any authenticity in the argument that Russia has genuine security concerns?
What should be the security concerns? That there
That it
are
has to be
independent
surrounded
states?
by buffer states?
Is it a security concern for India that there are independent states at Indian borders? Do you say, for our security, the countries next to India, they have to be non-sovereign, non-independent countries? I mean, it's ridiculous to consider this as a legitimate security concern of Russia. And let's be very honest here. NATO never had plans to have postings of missiles or anything of that sort in Ukraine. That's all invented by Russian propaganda. There was no concrete NATO membership process for Ukraine. It was not on the agenda to bring Ukraine into NATO in 2022. And President Macron, Chancellor Scholz, everybody confirmed this to Putin several times. But it's an argument used to justify the colonial and imperial ambitions that Russia has to colonize neighboring countries and to roll back history. I think it's very important to contradict this, because if you accept the Russian propaganda that it's NATO's fault and there are security concerns, you always shift the blame. And somehow you blame the West or NATO or the US or whoever for the Russian war against aggression of Ukraine. But the blame is very easily determined. Under international law, the only relevant question is whose troops entered whose country. And it was Russian troops entering Ukraine. The case is absolutely clear under international law. And if you break the law, it doesn't help much to have a long discussion. Why are you breaking the law? It's clear who is the culprit. It's Russia violating international law with the aggression against Ukraine. The war could have been prevented by Putin not having his troops rolling into Ukraine.
And if I'm right, I think just before the war started, there was the last edition of the Normandy format talks, perhaps where President Putin again confirmed it to Germans and to the French that the military option is not on the table. And I think it was because of that when the chief of German naval staff was here in India in January 2022, he said that perhaps he doesn't really want a war. But anyway, that's a different thing.
He was wrong. He was wrong, and he was fired after, and there were good reasons to fire him. So let's not take this as an argument for anything. It was clear from end of summer 2021 that Putin had made the decision, yes, he wants to intervene in Ukraine. You can ask yourself the question, why were political levels in France and Germany and other European nations, why were they so happily denying everything? But it was clear that the decision was made. But Putin made a very, very grave miscalculation. He overestimated his military might. And by the way, until today, many are overestimating what Russia really is militarily.
So, Nico, I'd like to come
But let me say something else.
Yeah.
And the miscalculation that is even, I think, more important from a Putin point of view is that he is not fighting the armed forces of Ukraine. He is fighting all of Ukrainian society. And all of Ukrainian society is resisting this war of aggression. And I think that is something we should carefully look into, because on the Russian side, it's soldiers that are paid a lot of money to die in a foreign country. But in Ukraine, it's the whole of society defending their homeland. That those are two different things. That's why I believe this both-sidism is not really characterizing what is really going on in Ukraine. There are no two equal sides of the war. There is an aggressor and there are people defending their homeland.
I totally understand this particular dynamic because, of course, I really work on the Russia-Ukraine war myself. And what I see that after 3 years of Russia's unprecedented military might, at least in theory, the battlefront remains rather static. And there is a massive loss, casualty rate for Russians as well as for Ukrainians. But, what surprises me is the Russian side is pretty high. Where is this war going? Do you think that there will be a stop to this war anytime soon? I'm of the opinion that I don't see a ceasefire in near future. But, I speak of it when I'm sitting here in New Delhi. What about you, your perception when you're sitting there in Berlin and Munich, etc.?
The inconvenient truth for everybody with interests in Ukraine is the war is not ending itself. So the idea, oh, somehow Putin will win or somehow this will freeze, I think this is disproved by reality now.
So you think that Donald Trump really is not able to push some kind of a ceasefire down Ukraine's throat, despite his best intentions or despite his best efforts or rhetoric, which whatever way you might like to call it?
I always find it very interesting that there is a general perception that Donald Trump is a little bit of a problem, to say the least. And there is a general perception also that in his first presidency and now in his second presidency, he gets many things wrong. And at the same time, there is a strong belief that Trump can somehow pull a rabbit out of the hat and create ceasefire and peace in Ukraine. I think it was clear before he attempted it that this will not to lead to ceasefire and peace, and now we see it in practice. But we have to be honest to ourselves. Why did we even believe that he finds a magic formula that nobody else found?
No, because
Putin is sticking with his maximalist goals. And in order to bring Putin to the table, you need to put him under pressure. So just calling Zelensky and calling Putin, make a little bit of pressure to both and then say, okay, now there will be ceasefire and peace. I mean, that was an illusion from the very beginning. It's very similar to the illusion you just have to talk to Putin and then there will be peace. It's not going to happen. You have to pressure Putin.
Yeah.
And there my answer is, I think Trump is right in pressuring Putin on energy and on energy resources.
Right.
Because it's not an existential financial problem for Putin, but the war is a financial problem. But I have my doubts if Trump will be able to bring oil prices down in a time frame that will really put pressure on Putin.
Yeah.
He might have to sanction the shadow fleet that is trading Russian oil around the globe. And he might have to sanction, and this will have consequences for India as well, he might have to sanction everybody with secondary sanctions who is buying Russian oil, gas, and LNG.
Yeah.
This will include us, because I mean we are buying Russian oil via India.
Yeah.
But I think this will affect many. But I think he is right that this might pressure Putin. But I believe this will not be enough. There needs to be military pressure as well. And the military pressure needs to be applied by investing into the Ukrainian defense industry sector, by strengthening the armed forces of Ukraine, and by delivering military capabilities to Ukraine that allow the Ukrainians to do what we would do ourselves in this military situation.
Right. That has opened a Pandora's box, and there are a lot of questions coming your way. But first thing, I was smiling earlier, why? Because there seems to be an undying hope in people. Just like Putin is a master strategist, Donald Trump is also a master strategist. And regardless of just how nonsensical the decision seemed and proved to be, people still seem to think that something good is going to come out of that or something. So I agree, and that was the reason why.
What did master strategist Putin achieve? He demonstrated to everybody that the Russian military might is a Potemkin village. There's not really much there. He demonstrated to everybody the corruption of the Russian military system to an extent that Xi Jinping is starting purging generals because he's asking himself, do I really have what I paid for?
Right.
Because in Russia, the things that were paid for were not there in the armed forces. And after 3 years of war, Putin is showing his pride by announcing to the world via the Russian news agency that after a long battle, the Russian forces took a village nobody ever heard of. That's about the size of Russian military power these days. But still, very interesting, still you have people around the globe who are telling each other how strong Russia is and that you cannot win against Russia and all of that. So that's somehow an interesting contradiction.
Let me circle this back to what role can now Europe needs to play. I mean, it's very evident, right? You cannot bank upon United States of America anymore. I don't know what the internal discussions out there are, but I guess it was very clear. You are with the Munich Security Conference yourself. J.D. Vance was at the Munich Security Conference when perhaps the first bell rung, which is that you cannot depend on the US.
But he was not speaking about foreign and security policy at all, to be honest. Maybe he will do this next year, but he was speaking about something else.
Yeah, he was speaking about something else, but the kind of note that he struck there, I mean, that was, I think, very problematic. But coming back to more tangible questions and tangible curiosities. The first thing, I understand that CDU has been advocating for more support for Ukraine, etc. Let me just start with a simple question and then we can build later. High time that CDU has been saying that the Ukrainians have to be sent the Taurus missiles. Okay, we saw that Storm Shadows and Scalp, etc., were sent, which are British and French missiles, but Taurus have a particular value, right? Do you think that now the time has come? Now that the CDU is going to be taking over, we will have a new chancellor in Germany from the 7th of May. Do you think the Tauruses are on the way?
But I have no reason to believe that Friedrich Merz is not following through on his commitment. I believe an initiative where Taurus is delivered together with the Swedish Gripen
Gripens.
jet
Okay.
would be a good initiative, because I think that fits with the strategy I mentioned earlier. I think Germany will reconnect to Northern Europe, to Central Eastern Europe, and that will have a reflection in Ukraine policy and in Russia policy. And it might make it more difficult for France, Italy, and Spain to hide behind German reluctance. And you have to consider that Taurus is addressing a problem that is a problem not only for the security of Ukraine, it's a problem for the security of Europe, because we need standoff weapons for conventional deterrence. So the right decision is to deliver Taurus to Ukraine, but at the same time to put an order in to produce 1,000 Taurus more with defense industry to build up the capability, because the other alternative option we have for standoff weapons that deter Russia conventionally are Tomahawk missiles from the US, and it's questionable if we are getting them.
Yeah, that's a fair point you made about Tomahawks. What are your views then on, for example, in the process, in this humongous process of European military modernization, what role are your American weapons going to play there? Because Donald Trump may be saying all that he's saying about Europeans, being the freeloaders, etc. But when it comes to canceling the defense orders, the American defense industries are not happy.
I'm not sure if orders will be cancelled. I think some countries, not Germany, but some other countries will rethink their F-35 program.
Okay. Do you mean Poland?
Portugal, Finland, others, they have openly questioned it.
Okay.
I think they will choose now planes with a 100% European industrial base. So there will be more Eurofighter, more Gripen in Europe in general. But the orders that are already in with US defense industry, I think the contracts will be fulfilled.
Okay.
But there will be no new orders. And that's, of course, bad news for US defense industry, but the US brought this upon themselves. And you mentioned Munich Security Conference. I think before Munich, the consensus was we Europeans, we will spend more on defense, and large parts of it we will buy American.
Yeah.
And after Munich, and after the incident with President Trump and President Zelensky in the White House,
Yeah, at the Oval Office you're referring to.
in the Oval Office, the new European consensus is we will spend much more on defense now, but we will fight tooth and nail. We will do everything we can not to spend the money American. We have to scale up our own possibilities, our production capabilities, our technology. And I'm saying, to be frankly, also with European publics, it would not be accepted if all the money is immediately spent into US defense industry. I think this has a very negative perception now.
So that brings me to the question of capabilities, because I would say widely held perceptions about Europeans is, I mean, while you have on the one hand state-of-the-art defense industries, right, big defense industries, but when it comes to spending on your own national security or the security of your continent, whichever way you want to look at it, there is a big problem. So do you also see or foresee a situation where you have to really start? I mean, you did mention Germany, you did mention the debt break relaxation on defense spending, etc. But Germany cannot do it alone, right? I mean, there are countries like France. Emmanuel Macron has been making very provocative statements as well about boots on the ground and everything. How do we understand how much of that is sincere and how much of that is simply said in order to rally public opinion around it, and how much of that is only said to sort of convey this to Putin? I mean, how do we make sense of it? It sounds very incredible.
Yeah, but let's be pragmatic here.
Okay.
And the pragmatic approach is first to accept the reality. The European Union is not Europe.
Okay.
Not even the European pillar in NATO is Europe. And we have to decide whether security of Ukraine is European security, or if security of Ukraine and European security are different questions.
All right.
At the same time, there are some countries who have made the decision already and who are moving forward. And I think the new development within the European NATO partners is we are not willing anymore to lose time by trying to bring everybody along. So the Scandinavians, I mean Denmark, Sweden, they have been moving forward very quickly
Yes.
already over the last years, the Baltic states as well. Unfortunately, if smaller countries are moving forward, that's not pushing the needle very much. It's significant, but of course it makes a big difference if Germany is moving.
Right.
But it will be more groups of countries and coalitions of the willing moving forward than this idea that the whole bloc of all European nations is moving together. But it will make a big difference if such a big country such as Germany gets serious about its own defense, together with partners, even if it's not all of them.
No, I think honestly, if you ask my opinion on this, the way I read it is that I think it's a much more efficient way to look at defense spending and defense modernization, because getting 27 member states on board with respect to these decisions, especially when you have a Slovakia and a Hungary also on board with very different
But
views,
there are
also
elections
Italy.
elsewhere as well. I mean, you can
Yes.
complain about Hungary and Slovakia,
Yeah.
but the truth is we have strong parties in many European countries that are basically parroting the Kremlin propaganda or the Kremlin foreign policy. So you cannot be sure about where different countries are in the future. But the European Union is a trading bloc anyway. It's
Yeah.
not a security institution. So the trading bloc European Union can help the countries with providing for their own security. There's a specific role to play.
Yeah.
But I think it's a misconception if you think the European Union is now taking care of European security. It will be some European countries who are doing more now for European security.
So very quickly, I mean, the question then to my mind, and I think which is probably a lot of people would also want to ask, is that how do you then differentiate? We get the point that the EU 27 going together in terms of the defense procurement and modernization might be a very inefficient way. And the coalition of the willing with whoever wants to come along is much more efficient. Now, very quickly, what do you think are here is the demarcation? What is it that the European Union can really do when it comes to anything to do with military? I don't think that I'm with you when you say that they were not meant to really behave like a military bloc. They are a geo-economic bloc. So is there anything they can do at all, or is it just up in the air?
I can tell you an example from recent past in Germany.
Okay.
Even top-level politicians. So many top-level politicians in Germany for the first time dealt with the question of air defense because of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. And then they had the brilliant idea, oh yes, air defense, we have a problem, and all the missiles and the drones from Russia we have to defend. Why are we not organizing a European air defense? And then there was the idea the European Union needs to organize air defense in Europe. And this was a typical discussion of people who are dealing with this for the first time in their lives. Because we have for a long time, we already have integrated air defense in NATO.
NATO, yes.
And it's a very typical discussion where people are sometimes unaware of what is already there, what is the specific role for the European Union to play, what is the role member states are playing. And the European Union, I think, can play a role in increasing military mobility. Think about all the bridges in Europe, all the trains, all the needs to move troops around in Europe. That's where the European Union, as an economic bloc, can play an important role. I think when it comes to future technologies, drones, autonomous systems, satellite capabilities, there is a role for the European Union to play for research and development and for development and capabilities. Maybe there is a way for standardized procurement when it comes to simple things such as artillery ammunition, where everybody needs the same caliber.
Which they have also been doing, for Ukraine.
Unsuccessfully. So the European Union was talking about procuring 1 million 155 millimeter rounds.
Yes.
And then they were not able to procure even that. So let's not have unrealistic expectations. The European Union has a role to play, but the main role is coming from European members of NATO, from individual countries moving forward. And I mean, that's the definition of leadership. So I'm not so much concerned, is everybody together and then always finding an argument why I have to deal with a country that does not want to move along. I mean, leadership is if Germany moves on and is asking others to go with Germany. And that's a paradigm shift, if you want to say so. That's the real Zeitenwende.
Yeah.
Because Germany is always very good in commenting on what others are doing. But
Yes.
taking the initiative, taking the risk of taking initiative, saying this is what we want to do for European security, please come with us. I think if this leadership is coming out of the center of Europe, from a country such as Germany, it makes a difference, and it will. Others will come along with this, and that this kind of German leadership is, I think, what many in Europe expected, and already asks from us in Germany many years, but Germany was always reluctant to provide this kind of leadership. And I think now is the chance to provide it.
Well, I mean, I would completely agree with that reading, of course. Now, very quickly, before I bring your attention to Indo-Pacific and ask you what brings you to India, one more thing about your continent. There seems to be a kind of a bit of a strategic schizophrenia, and I use this term knowing that it is perhaps too strong, but nonetheless, just bear with me. On the one hand, you have the mighty Russian army, which was unable to win a war. We did discuss the casualty, all the losses to the equipment, etc. The battlefront being pretty static, the Ukrainians sort of, driving them away from the Black Sea in many ways, etc. So we do see that despite the military, at least the reputation, that Russia has not been able to live up to its reputation. It's also landed in shrinking of Russia's export base. We see that on the one hand. That it is impossible for Russia to win this war militarily, is what I keep hearing from Europeans and also from you. And then on the other hand, there is a stark opposite of it, which is that Russia is going to invade another European country if we don't ramp up our security. How can Russia, that can win and lose at the same time? That is the purpose of asking you to sort of
It sounds contradictory, but if you look at it closer, it's not contradictory at all.
Okay.
Because first of all, the danger posed by Russia is not the amount of tanks they produce or the amount of armored vehicles. I think the danger posed by Russia is the political will that you have 800 to 1,000 of your own soldiers dying every day and still are willing to move on. So the political will by the Russian leadership to be ready to have many of their own people killed to achieve minimum military goals, that is something that should worry all of us.
Okay.
Because that is what makes Russia dangerous. We cannot fight like that. And democracies such as India, they will have difficulties. Yeah, this is a very brutal authoritarian way of fighting with disregard for human life. And that is something we have to take very seriously. The second element in this, Russia did not depart from its maximalist ambitions. The Russian goal is to change the order in Europe. And in order to change the order in Europe, you have to challenge NATO cohesion. That's why the likelihood of Russia trying to attack a European country that is member of NATO to demonstrate to the world that cohesion in NATO is not working, especially now with the US president questioning Article 5, I think that's a real risk.
Okay.
And we are not living in the 1950s. We are also not living in the 1910s. This is not the First World War, not the Second World War. And I mean, the rhetorics about the Third World War is, if you ask me, misguided anyway. So we are not talking about armies meeting on a field and then having a battle with each other. We are talking about combined attacks with drones, missiles, cruise missiles, aeroballistic missiles that are really difficult to defend. It's not possible to defend against a wave of 200 missiles, drones, and all of that. We have seen this between Israel and Iran. We have seen this in Ukraine, and it's a challenge for us as well. So Russia can attack some villages in eastern Ukraine, at the same time have an air attack somewhere in the Baltic states. It's possible. There is no contradiction here. And now consider another factor. Russia is producing a wave of around 150 missiles, drones, and flying objects that are attacking Ukraine. It needs around 40 to 45 days to produce one wave. Russia is producing armored vehicles in large quantities, but it's burning through because it's fighting in Ukraine and is losing a lot of armored vehicles every day. Now consider there is a ceasefire in Ukraine, and Russia will not stop producing. It will fill the garrisons that are now empty next to Finland, next to the Baltic states. So the risk will very quickly grow if the Russian production is not going into the battlefield in Ukraine, but it is going into a build-up next to the Baltic state. I mean, in military, you have to look at the intentions of your enemy. And Putin's intention is to change the European order. That's why I think this threat of Russian reconstitution of armed forces and then attacking a European country is taken so seriously.
Okay.
And look at Russian military plans. I mean, they are out in the open. How they want to structure their armed forces vis-à-vis the Baltic states, vis-à-vis Finland, vis-à-vis the Black Sea area, how many troops they want to have, what they want to produce. I think it would be irresponsible not taking this seriously.
Okay.
But the logical consequence of what you are saying is, let's beat Russia and Ukraine.
Well, I keep
Because
hearing.
if we are beating them in Ukraine, then we are deterring them from further attacks, and they will be less of a problem in the future, and it will also be much cheaper for everybody.
Yeah. So, no, I do get that because, I mean, I keep hearing this a lot from the Europeans that it's much cheaper for them to fend for their security by supporting Ukraine right now than to wait for a worst case scenario to unfold later. But anyway, coming to the Russian military industrial complex, and I asked you this question because it's extremely relevant for India. You know, India has been a very old customer to Russian weapons. And because of the war in Ukraine, I see two trends. One is that we are still waiting for the air defenses, the S-400. We ordered for 5 and we're still waiting for 2 to arrive. Russia has given us some dates and we are hoping that they will arrive. So I would want to have your views on that. And the second is that I have not seen any fresh order made by the Indian side for the Russian weapons. What, in your opinion, could be the reasons for that? Do you think it is a genuine thing to do with the Russian military-industrial complex? Or is it also got to do with the fact that Russia is getting pushed with China in a way that is going to have repercussions?
If I would be India, I would ask myself, did the Russians sell us stuff that is not working? Because, I mean, Russia is clearly not winning in Ukraine, right? So, I mean, their weapon systems do not seem to be that great. I mean, they are not working as advertised. Not even against Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine was the poorest country in Europe, and Russia cannot even win against the poorest country in Europe.
But there the argument is that it's NATO's combined might, which is not true, which is again a disinformation because it's not NATO's combined might behind Ukraine. Had that
No,
been
there
the
seem
case,
to the truth is, I think there have been technological developments in recent years that make it relatively easy to fight against Russian military equipment. And if I would be a costumer, I would look into it. So if small units with mobile anti-tank weapons can take out entire columns of Russian armored vehicles, I would think twice if that is really what I need. But it has consequences also for doctrine, structure, and training of my own armed forces. So there's a lot to learn from how Russia is not winning in Ukraine and how Ukraine is defending. That questions, I think, many military procurements, but also Western military procurements. I mean, in Germany, I'm confronted with generals very often who believe that how they thought war would be fought 15 years ago is still the way they could be successful. And the battlefield in Ukraine demonstrates many things are not true anymore, and you have to think differently about this. When it comes to the Russian military-industrial complex, I think Russia has invested a lot into missiles and into electronic warfare,
okay,
with the result that Russia is good in missiles and electronic warfare, which is a real problem for everybody.
Okay.
All GPS-guided ammunitions, including those American weapon systems that have been delivered to Ukraine, are not working anymore. I mean, this has large consequences. At the same time, Ukraine found many ingenious, quick, and cheap ways to beat the Russian technology. And I mean, that's interesting to all of us. If there is a cheaper way of solving a military problem, why not looking into this? Why I do not have to buy expensive platforms anymore. I can find other ways
okay,
of solving the same problem. Russia gets help for its military-industrial complex with dual-use goods, especially from China, and I think that is something we have to look into. I think we could do more to prevent Russia from getting this.
What
But
could you
I'm
do to
also,
prevent this? Because we have been waiting for Germany to do something significantly to de-risk from China. And this is something where I feel we all understand it's extremely difficult. We ourselves are not being able to de-risk because we have $100 billion of trade deficit with China. But in your situation, the things get a very different sanctity to it because of this military
It doesn't make sense.
situation.
It doesn't make sense, and we have to become clear on our foreign policy. I mean, if we support Ukraine in a war of aggression against Russia, and at the same time, indirectly, we are buying Russian oil and energy, we are shooting ourselves in the foot. Let's be honest here. If we are sanctioning Russia, and at the same time, our exports to Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan and other Central Asian countries are ramping up quickly, we should not be naive, but we should crack down on circumvention of sanctions. When it comes to China, it's more difficult because I do not think that Germany has instruments that can prevent China from delivering dual-use goods to Russia.
Yeah.
I think it's more for the US to do something about this. They are more powerful vis-à-vis China. But what we should look into is where are all the parts that are in Russian drones and missiles, where are they coming from? They are coming from 24 different countries, by the way, sometimes including India.
India.
And I think that is a task for the new German government, but also for the new European Commission to follow through on the sanctions and to prevent circumventions and to punish those who are delivering dual-use goods to Russia so that Russia can continue its war of aggression. But the main point here, it's not the Russian military-industrial complex.
Okay.
They need a lot of help from others. Unfortunately, we are not preventing others from helping Russia, and Russia finds ways all of the time to get goods into Russia that they need for their military-industrial complex. But there's no need to be afraid of the Russian military-industrial complex. They did not build one single bomber plane, I think, over the last 20 years. So if we would have the bravery with Taurus or with other weapon systems to destroy their bombers while they are on the ground in the Russian airbase, then they would have no instruments anymore to bomb Ukrainian cities all of the time.
Speaking to you, Nico, I'm getting a very a very different kind of a feeling about my own perceptions of Germany. Of course, this is a Germany that I don't think even the Germans know. I mean, this is very new semantics, yes. But since we mentioned India, and I think with this primer, I think we can now dive into India. Just the first simple question to you first. What brings you to India?
Well, I came here to test more of the masala, and I was here some time ago, and got familiar with a few people. I mean, at Raisina Dialogue, you always meet a lot of interesting people. So it makes you want to come back and to intensify the conversation, to learn. I think there is unused potential when it comes to the German-Indisch partnership. Also a possible security relationship.
Yes.
And that is something that I think needs exploring. And maybe I can also use the conversations I have during this visit to give an advice or two to the new incoming German government.
Well, I'm sure your advice is going to count. But, for India, and let me just focus on the defense cooperation a little bit here. I think Germans are no strangers here because our biggest strategic partnership model. So under the defense acquisition procedure reforms that we have of the 2020, we are expecting another set of reforms soon. But according to the existing reforms and existing principles, we have a model called the strategic partnership model. So the biggest ever, strategic partnership deal has been struck with the ThyssenKrupp Marine Systems, and the Indian partner here is Mazagon Dock, and this is for the submarines, 6 conventional submarines with air-independent propulsion technology. So when it comes to submarines, I don't think the Germans are any strangers. But beyond that, how do we take it forward? And I ask you that because Boris Pistorius, who was the defense minister with the previous administration, he came to India and he categorically said that to help India diversify away from its dependence is one of the goals of Germany. So will we see a continuation for this policy towards India in the incoming cabinet by Friedrich Merz?
I think India will be important. I will advocate for the new government that the Chancellor makes an early visit to India to continue and build upon the partnership, especially in the security sector. I think we have potential where we can work together. It's not only about German submarines. I mean, they are the best submarines in the world. That's why India is I think, made a good choice of buying them. But there is, I think, also perspective for very mutual cooperation. We have similar problems when it comes to underwater cables, underwater infrastructure protection, maritime surveillance,
Okay.
satellite capabilities. And then, for example, in the satellite dimension, the space dimension in general, I think India in many aspects is more advanced than we are. So it's not just Germany helping to diversify in the sense of Germany selling things to India. I think what we have to look for are real partnerships. I
So,
already said that the Europeans and the Germans, they will look also for supplies, for procurement where there is production capability. There might be something in India that we need. I mean, India is exporting to other countries as well. So it's a two-sided relationship that can be strengthened. And if you look what others are doing with India already, look at France, our neighbor,
yeah.
there is unused potential from the German side. And at Germany, I think it's smart from Germany to explore this. And I think it's in the, as I understand, in the interest of India to strengthen a relationship with strong European partners in addition to all the partnerships you already have. And of course, I'm learning a lot during this trip, and I think Germany can learn a lot in the future about China and about managing the relationship to China and about also the challenges China is posing, where India, I think, has much more experience and much more knowledge, so we can profit from each other.
Well, I agree, Nico, because one of the things that you did not state explicitly, which I probably can sort of articulate, is that India is looking at becoming a net exporter of defense equipment as well. And we are sending most of that export is going to the United States, of course. But in Europe, the biggest customer for us is France. So I think what we need to put together is something which has a vision for co-developing and co-producing and then perhaps co-exporting. But it will take into account a lot of changes on both our sides, especially on the German side with respect to your very, very rigid bureaucracy. So I think that those are things that probably will be very useful. But very quickly, would you like to?
And there needs to be, I mean, I think Ursula von der Leyen mentioned this when she was here recently,
Yes, yes, you
and
were
I
saying.
think she is right. We have security partnership agreements with countries such as Japan, South Korea, Australia. And in order to get into this business of commonly developing technologies, procuring something together, and having a more intensive security partnership, I think it would make sense to pursue such an agreement. It makes security cooperation easier. It puts it on a different platform. I think that would be a good next step for both of us.
So well on that, Nico, thank you so much for speaking to us. And I do believe that, especially under the kind of instability which is pushed upon the world after Donald Trump's, I would say, rather knee-jerk behavior, it certainly opens up a lot of space for India and European partners to double down on their cooperation in a way that benefits both our sides. Thank you so much for speaking to us on The Print and wishing you good luck with your visit to India.
Thank you for the invitation.